The night before I was supposed to marry the man of my dreams, fate handed me a revelation I never asked for. And the next day, I returned the favor in a way that brought him to his knees. Before we begin, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. If you find strength in stories of empowerment like mine, consider subscribing. It costs nothing, but means everything to our growing community. Harrison Montgomery was everything I thought I wanted. Successful. Charming. From a family whose name opened doors I didn't even know existed. His mother Diana had become the maternal figure I desperately needed after losing my parents. His sister Claire? The closest friend I'd ever had. For 3 years, I believed I was living a fairy tale. The successful businessman and the devoted fiancé. The perfect match on paper. But paper burns, doesn't it? The bachelor party was being held at the Grand Hotel, just down the street from our penthouse. I hadn't planned to go there that night, but Diana had made a special request that Harrison wear his grandfather's cufflinks for the ceremony. I'd forgotten to give them to him earlier. The hotel staff knew me well. Harrison and I had hosted countless charity galas there. They directed me to the private lounge without question. And that's when I heard it. Harrison's distinctive laugh echoing through the partially open door, followed by words that turned my blood to ice. "Come on, man, you can't be serious about settling down with Sophia." His best friend Blake's voice carried clearly to where I stood. "Why not?" "She's perfect on paper," Harrison replied, words slightly slurred from whatever expensive scotch they'd been drinking. "Her trust fund will help expand Montgomery Enterprises, and her connections are invaluable. Besides, she's completely devoted to me." The laughter that followed made my stomach clench, but it was his next words that shattered my world completely. "She's just temporary anyway, until someone better comes along. Someone more, suitable for the long term." I stood frozen, clutching the velvet box containing the cufflinks as everything I thought I knew crumbled around me. 3 years of memories flashed before my eyes, suddenly tainted with a new perspective. The late night of business calls. The unexpected cancellations. The subtle ways he'd manipulated my decisions. It all made sense now. But I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I returned home and opened my laptop. As Harrison's business partner, I had access to everything. Emails. Financial records. Client information. 4 hours later, I had enough evidence to destroy not just his heart, but his entire carefully constructed world. Have you ever had that moment when you realize everything you believed was a lie? When the future you'd mapped out vanishes in an instant? The morning of the wedding arrived with an unsettling serenity. My hands didn't shake as I applied my makeup, a stark contrast to the trembling excitement I'd imagined feeling on this day. The evidence I'd gathered lay hidden in a cream-colored envelope, tucked safely in my wedding suite. Diana burst into the room, her eyes glistening with motherly pride. "Sophia, darling, the flowers just arrived and they're absolutely perfect." She held up my bouquet of white peonies and blush roses, unaware that it would soon become a weapon rather than a symbol of love. As my bridesmaids fluttered around me in their champagne-colored dresses, I caught Claire's reflection in the mirror. Harrison's sister stood behind me, adjusting my veil with such tenderness that my resolve almost wavered. "Almost. I can't believe my brother got so lucky," Claire whispered, squeezing my shoulders. "You're going to take his breath away." "If only you knew how right you are," I thought, maintaining my practiced smile. The hours passed in a blur of hairspray, lipstick touches, and champagne toasts I couldn't bring myself to drink. Every ping from my phone made my heart race, not from pre-wedding jitters, but from anticipation of what was to come. My private investigator had promised final confirmations by noon. At 11:43 a.m., the text arrived, additional evidence secured. The reporter is in position. I excused myself to the bathroom, phone clutched in my trembling hands. The screenshots confirmed everything: Harrison's offshore accounts, the diverted company funds, and most damningly, emails to his mistress discussing their post-honeymoon plans. The same mistress who ironically sat on his company's board of directors. When I emerged, Diana pulled me aside and fastened a delicate pearl necklace around my neck. "It's been in the Montgomery family for generations," as she said. "Harrison's grandmother wore it on her wedding day." The pearls felt like ice against my skin, another family heirloom that would become part of this day's collateral damage. "Thank you, Diana," I whispered, hugging her tightly. "I want you to remember that no matter what happens today, you've been more of a mother to me than I could have ever hoped for." She looked at me quizzically, but before she could respond, the wedding planner appeared, headset in place, clipboard at the ready. "Place is everyone. The guests are seated, and the groom is at the altar." My bridesmaids lined up, their excitement palpable. Claire kissed my cheek before taking her place at the front of the line. I waited until they'd all left before retrieving the envelope from its hiding place and sliding it into a discreet pocket sewn into my dress. Through the heavy church doors, I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon, the same song Harrison and I had chosen together on a rainy Sunday months ago. My phone buzzed one final time, a reporter and photographer in position. Business partners all present. Police contact on standby. I deleted the message and tucked the phone away. "Ready, Miss Grant?" the coordinator asked. I thought of the moment I'd first met Harrison at that charity gala, how his smile had lit up the room. I thought of our first kiss in the rain. The way he'd proposed under the stars in Tuscany. All the dreams we'd shared. Then I thought of his cruel laughter last night. The years of lies. The carefully orchestrated deception. "Yes," I told the coordinator, my voice wrapped in silk. "I'm ready." The church doors swung open. The wedding march began. 200 guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Harrison stood tall and handsome in his tuxedo, beaming with proud, practiced charm. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, that smile would shatter along with his reputation, his business, and his carefully constructed world. This wasn't a wedding march. It was a countdown to destruction. Each step down the aisle brought flickers of memories, moments I'd once treasured but now recognized as carefully crafted deceptions. The soft whispers of a beautiful bride from the guests felt like bitter ironies against my skin. Harrison's smile grew wider as I approached, his confidence unwavering, the perfect mask of a man who thought he had everyone fooled. 3 steps from the altar, I caught Blake's eye in the front row. His smirk faltered slightly when I held his gaze. 2 steps away, and I could see Diana dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Claire stood among my bridesmaids, practically bouncing with excitement. 1 final step. "You look stunning," Harrison whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, just slightly. Just enough. The priest opened his mouth to begin, but I turned to face our audience instead. The envelope felt heavy against my thigh as I reached for it. The sound of the seal breaking echoed in the sudden silence. "Before we begin," my voice carried clearly through the church, "I'd like to share some readings. Not from the Bible, but from Harrison's private emails to Rebecca Matthews, dated throughout our engagement." The color drained from Harrison's face as I pulled out the first document. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while confused murmurs rippled through the congregation. "My dearest Rebecca," I read, my voice steady. Once the wedding secures the merger and Sophia's trust fund is accessible, we can proceed with our original plan. She suspects nothing. The murmurs grew louder. Harrison stepped toward me, but I moved away, pulling out more papers. But wait, there's more, or I continued, my smile sharp as glass. Would anyone like to hear about the offshore accounts? Or perhaps the creative accounting at Montgomery Enterprises? I have copies for everyone, including the SEC representatives who should be arriving right about. The church doors opened with perfect timing, revealing 2 suited agents. No! Harrison lunged for the papers, but I'd anticipated this. I let the documents scatter, watching as they floated down like toxic snowflakes, each one revealing another layer of his corruption. Sophia, please, a Harrison hissed, grabbing my arm. We can talk about this. I twisted free, facing him with all the cold fury I'd accumulated. Talk? Like how you talked about me at your bachelor party? Just temporary, wasn't I? Until someone better comes along? His face went from white to grey. In the front row, Blake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding everyone's eyes. I trusted you, I continued, my voice carrying through the now silent church. I loved you. But you saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. A means to an end. Diana stood up, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Harrison, what is she talking about? Mother, I can explain. Explain the embezzlement? I interrupted. The affair? The planned merger that would have bankrupted dozens of families? Please, Harrison, explain to everyone exactly who you are. The SEC agents were moving forward now, flanking the altar. Rebecca had already slipped out a side door, but she wouldn't get far. Another team was waiting outside. You've ruined everything, a Harrison snarled, his charming facade finally cracking completely. I smiled, reaching up to remove the Montgomery family pearls. No, Harrison. You did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with. The next few moments dissolved into chaos. The agents moved in. Claire was sobbing. Diana stood frozen in disbelief. Guests were either fleeing or recording everything on their phones. Through it all, I maintained my composure, watching as Harrison's perfect world crumbled around him. As he was led away in handcuffs, Harrison turned back one last time. I did love you, in my way. Your way. I stepped close, keeping my voice low. Your way was never good enough. Consider this my wedding gift, the truth, finally, about the man you really are. I turned away, walking back down the aisle alone, my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Diana's muffled sobs, the continued click of cameras, and the growing buzz of shocked conversations. But ahead of me lay freedom. Justice. And the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, karma needs a little help arriving on schedule. Would you have had the courage to do what I did? To stand at the altar not as a bride, but as an avenger? The following weeks unfolded like scenes from a movie I never thought I'd star in. Headlines screamed a Montgomery heir's empire crumbles, and a jilted bride exposes corporate corruption. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from well-wishers and journalists, all eager to hear more about the bride who brought down one of the city's most prominent families. Claire called daily, her voice always wavering between anger and desperation. Why didn't you tell me? She'd ask. I could have helped. But we both knew she couldn't have. Her blind spot for her brother had always been her greatest weakness. Diana's reaction surprised me most. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't she appeared at my door carrying a familiar velvet box. The pearls, Ishi said, holding them out. They belong to you now. Diana, I couldn't. You exposed the truth, Ishi interrupted, her voice firm despite her red-rimmed eyes. That makes you more worthy of these than anyone who's worn them before. We sat on my new sofa, drinking tea from cups I'd bought just that morning. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. I failed him, as she finally whispered. Somewhere along the way, I must have. No, I took her hand. Harrison made his own choices. You gave him everything he needed to be a good man. He chose differently. The Montgomery Enterprises investigation revealed deeper corruption than anyone had imagined. Harrison's father had laid the groundwork years ago, and Harrison had merely perfected the art of deception. The company's collapse affected hundreds of employees, but I'd prepared for that too. Anonymous tips had helped many transfer their investments weeks before the scandal broke. Rebecca turned state's evidence, of course. She'd always been practical that way. Her testimony would ensure Harrison spent a significant portion of his prime years in a federal institution, trading his bespoke suits for prison orange. The media painted me as a hero, the whistleblower bride who chose justice over love. They didn't understand that it was never a choice. The moment I heard Harrison's true feelings, the path forward became crystal clear. Love without respect is like a house built on sand. It's bound to collapse. 1 month after the wedding, I received a letter from Harrison's grandmother. Her shaky handwriting filled 3 pages with memories of her own marriage, of watching Harrison grow up, and finally, her gratitude for preventing the family name from becoming synonymous with unchecked corruption. You did what none of us had the courage to do, as she wrote. You saw the truth and refused to look away. As summer faded into autumn, I found myself walking through Central Park more often. The changing leaves reminded me that transformation, while painful, was necessary for growth. Each step forward took me further from the woman who'd nearly married a lie, and closer to someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid of standing alone. Diana joined me for these walks sometimes. We never spoke of Harrison directly, but his absence hung between us like an invisible thread connecting 2 women who'd loved and lost the same person in different ways. You know, Ishi said during one of our walks, I always wanted a daughter who would carry on the Montgomery legacy of strength and integrity. Turns out I got one, just not in the way I expected. I squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of her words. In trying to destroy me, Harrison had inadvertently given me something precious, a family bound not by blood or false promises, but by truth and resilience. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't saying I do. It's having the courage to say I won't. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I found myself standing in front of Montgomery Enterprises' former headquarters. The building's gleaming facade remained unchanged, but the company's name had been replaced by that of its new owners. Inside, a different kind of energy pulsed through the renovated offices, one of transparency and renewed purpose. I'd been invited to consult on the company's restructuring, a delicious twist of fate that hadn't escaped my notice. Claire had taken over a small division of the company, determined to rebuild her family's legacy the right way. We'd slowly repaired our friendship, stronger now for having been tested. The quarterly reports show remarkable recovery, as she announced during a board meeting, her voice steady and confident. We've retained 80% of our original workforce and implemented all recommended transparency measures. I watched her with pride, remembering the tearful conversation we'd had 3 months ago when she discovered even more of Harrison's deceptions. Instead of breaking her, each revelation had only strengthened her resolve to make things right. The media had dubbed it the Montgomery Redemption, a story of corporate resurrection led by the women Harrison had underestimated. Diana had emerged from her initial shock to become a fierce advocate for corporate accountability, using her social connections to promote ethical business practices. My own consulting firm had expanded rapidly, specializing in corporate fraud prevention. Companies sought our services, hoping to avoid becoming the next cautionary tale. Harrison's trial was set for spring. His legal team had attempted every delay tactic possible, but justice had a way of catching up. One evening as I was leaving the office, I received an unexpected call from Harrison's grandmother. "I've been going through old family albums," as she said, her voice crackling with age and emotion. "There's something you should see." Over dinner in her elegant townhouse, she showed me photographs of Harrison as a child, images of a smiling boy who once had the potential for goodness before ambition and greed twisted his path. I watched him change, as she confided, her fingers tracing the edges of a yellowed photograph. Year by year, success by success, he became someone I didn't recognize. "You saw it too, didn't you?" Before anyone else did. I nodded, remembering subtle moments when Harrison's mask had slipped, a cruel comment here, a dismissive gesture there. Signs I'd chosen to ignore until that fateful night before our wedding. The Montgomery name meant something once, as she continued, closing the album. "Thanks to you, Claire, and Diana, it might mean something worthwhile again." As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred into streams of gold and silver. I thought about legacy, not just the Montgomerys, but my own. In choosing to expose the truth, I'd helped create a ripple effect of positive change. The wedding dress still hung in my closet, a reminder not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. Strength, clarity, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction. Building something better from the ashes of deception. The night before my wedding, I'd overheard a truth that shattered my world. Now, 6 months later, I'd helped build a new one, stronger, clearer, and far more authentic than the illusion I'd almost married into. Spring arrived with an unexpected weight. Harrison's trial loomed on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the witness stand, my voice unwavering as I recounted every detail. His eyes never left me during my testimony, but they no longer held the power to make my heart race. Instead, I saw him clearly for who he was, a man whose greatest defeat was being exposed for his true nature. The evidence was overwhelming. Each document I'd gathered that fateful night before the wedding became another nail in the coffin of his defense. His lawyers attempted to paint me as a vengeful woman scorned, but the paper trail told a different story, one of calculated fraud spanning years. The most poignant moment came when Diana testified. She sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her elegant composure intact as she detailed how her own son had manipulated family funds and betrayed generations of trust. The truth, as she stated clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, a must stand above blood. Harrison's face crumpled at her words. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion break through his practiced mask, the realization that he'd lost not just his freedom, but his mother's unwavering support. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years, no possibility of early parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Diana stepped forward, Claire and I flanking her sides. The Montgomery family, as she announced, her voice steady, has always valued integrity above all else. Today's verdict, while painful, upholds that tradition. We thank the jury for their service and justice for prevailing. Later that evening, we gathered at Diana's townhouse, not to mourn, but to close a chapter. Claire brought out a bottle of champagne, the same vintage we'd planned to serve at the wedding. To truth, as she toasted, her eyes meeting mine. And to the sister I almost had, who turned out to be more family than my own brother. Diana reached for my hand as we sipped our champagne. You know, she mused, I've been thinking about what you said that day at the altar, about love and truth. You chose truth over love, but in doing so, you showed the greatest love of all, love for justice, for what's right. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the girl who'd once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Montgomery. She'd been naive perhaps, but her belief in justice had been her saving grace. Harrison had seen her trust as weakness, never realizing it would be his undoing. The truth had cost me a wedding, but it had given me something far more valuable, the knowledge that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding the right partner, but about finding the strength to stand alone for what's right. 1 year after Harrison's sentencing, I found myself back at the Grand Hotel, not as a bride-to-be, but as the keynote speaker for a corporate ethics conference. The irony of speaking in the same building where I'd overheard Harrison's true nature wasn't lost on me. The ballroom was packed with executives, all eager to hear from the woman who'd exposed one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. As I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking against the polished wood, I caught my reflection in the glass panels, confident, poised, and completely transformed from the woman I'd been a year ago. "Good morning," I began, surveying the crowd. "You're here today because you want to learn how to prevent fraud and corruption in your organizations. But what you really need to learn is how to see the truth hiding behind perfect smiles and designer suits." In the front row, Diana and Claire sat proudly. Claire had successfully rebranded the remaining Montgomery assets into a new company focused on sustainable investments. Diana's foundation had already sponsored ethics programs at 3 major universities. "The greatest threat to corporate integrity," I continued, "isn't always external. Sometimes it's the charming CEO with a Harvard degree. Sometimes it's the trusted partner with a flawless track record. And sometimes, it's the person you plan to spend your life with." After my speech, during the networking reception, a young woman approached me, her hands trembling slightly as she introduced herself. "I'm engaged to my company's CFO," as she confided, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last week, I found some discrepancies in our books. After hearing your story, I don't know what to do." I looked at her, seeing my former self reflected in her uncertain eyes. "The truth doesn't get easier to tell," I said gently. "But living with lies becomes impossible once you see them." By the end of the day, another corporate fraud had been prevented, another scandal averted. The young woman's fiancé was quietly removed from his position, the authorities notified. She sent me a thank you note a month later, signed with her maiden name and a promise to never settle for less than complete honesty. I often wonder, if you discovered the person you loved was using you, would you have the courage to stand up not just for yourself, but for everyone they'd hurt? 18 months after the day I walked away from my own wedding, I received an unexpected phone call. Harrison wanted to see me. His request came through his prison counselor, a meeting for closure, he claimed. Diana and Claire advised against it, their protectiveness showing in their concerned expressions. But something in me needed this final conversation, this last piece of the puzzle to complete my healing. The prison visiting room was stark and cold, nothing like the luxurious spaces where we'd once shared our dreams. Harrison sat at the metal table, the orange jumpsuit a jarring contrast to the tailored suits he once wore. His features had hardened, the polished charm replaced by a weathered authenticity I'd never seen before. "Sophia," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him, maintaining a composed exterior while my heart raced with memories. "Why did you want to see me, Harrison?" He looked down at his hands, the ones that had once slipped an engagement ring onto my finger. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. Who I was. Who I am." 18 months of reflection, I noted. That's quite a change from the man who thought he could charm his way through life. "I deserved everything that happened," he admitted, surprising me with his directness. The truth is, I never deserved you. Not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't. The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of lost possibilities. Through the visiting room window, I could see clouds gathering, mirroring the storm of emotions in my chest. You know what the worst part is? He continued, looking up to meet my eyes. I did love you, in my twisted, selfish way. I loved you. But I loved power more. I loved the game more. Love shouldn't be a game, Harrison. No, he agreed quietly. It shouldn't. As I stood to leave, Harrison called out one last time. The night before the wedding, when you overheard me, was that the first moment you knew? I turned back, remembering the girl who'd stood outside that door, clutching those cufflinks. No, I answered honestly. It was just the first time I admitted what I'd always known. Walking out of the prison, I felt lighter somehow, not because Harrison had changed, or because his recognition of his faults had given me validation. I felt lighter because I finally understood. My strength hadn't come from exposing his lies or walking away from our wedding. It had come from choosing truth over comfort. Justice over love. Integrity over illusion. Diana was waiting in the parking lot, her presence a silent support. Are you okay? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Yes, I smiled, realizing it was completely true. I really am. As we drove away, I watched the prison disappear in the side mirror. Harrison would serve another 13 years, but I was already free from the weight of a what ifs here and a might have beens. Free from the ghost of a love that was more fiction than fact. The sky had cleared, and ahead of us, a rainbow arched across the horizon, nature's reminder that after every storm, there's a chance for something beautiful to emerge. Life had a funny way of working out. I'd lost a fiancé but gained a family. Lost a dream but found a purpose. The night before my wedding had seemed like an ending, but it had really been a beginning, the start of a journey towards something far more precious than the fairy tale I'd almost settled for. The truth, it turned out, hadn't just set me free. It had set us all free. 1 year after my meeting with Harrison, my life had blossomed in ways I never imagined possible. The Ethics Foundation had expanded globally, and our consulting firm had become the gold standard in corporate transparency. But it was a different kind of meeting that would mark this chapter of my story. I was giving a lecture at Columbia Business School when I noticed him in the audience, dark eyes fixed intently on my presentation, asking thoughtful questions about preventive measures against corporate fraud. Professor Marcus Chin, visiting faculty from Stanford, specialized in business ethics and corporate responsibility. After the lecture, he approached me with an interesting proposition. Miss Grant, your experience could revolutionize how we teach ethics in business schools. Would you consider collaborating on a comprehensive curriculum? There was something refreshingly genuine about him. No hidden agendas, no carefully crafted persona. Just authentic passion for creating positive change. Diana noticed it first, during a foundation board meeting where Marcus presented his ideas. He looks at you the way one should look at someone they admire, as she remarked afterward. Not as a prize to be won, but as an equal to be respected. Our professional collaboration slowly evolved into coffee discussions that stretched into dinner conversations. Marcus never pushed, never rushed. He understood the weight of my past and respected the strength it had given me. Claire teased me mercilessly about the way my eyes lit up when discussing our curriculum project. You know, Sophia, it's okay to be happy again. To trust again. But trust wasn't something I gave easily anymore. One evening over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village, I told Marcus everything, not just the headlines he'd read, but the raw truth of loving someone who saw you as nothing more than a means to an end. His response was simple but profound. A thank you for trusting me with your story. It couldn't have been easy to share. Months passed, and our curriculum project flourished. Business schools across the country began adopting our ethics program. Marcus and I spent countless hours refining case studies, including the Montgomery scandal, now taught as a landmark example of corporate fraud detection. One rainy evening, as we walked through Central Park after a successful presentation, Marcus stopped under the shelter of a massive oak tree. "You know what amazes me about you, Sophia," he said, raindrops glistening in his hair. "Not just your strength in exposing the truth, but your courage to remain open to possibility even after everything." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what Diana had noticed months ago. Here was a man who had built his career on teaching ethics, not because it was profitable, but because he believed in it. Someone who saw my past not as baggage, but as wisdom earned. "The truth is," he continued, "I've fallen in love with you. Not the headline version of you, but the real you, brilliant, compassionate, and unafraid to stand for what's right. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to show you that love can be honest, straightforward, and true." Standing there in the rain, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. Not the naive hope of my younger self, but something stronger, tempered by experience and wisdom. 3 years to the day after my almost wedding to Harrison, I stood in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting a different white dress. This one was simpler, more elegant, a reflection of the woman I'd become. Diana fussed with my veil, her eyes glistening with genuine happiness. "This time," she whispered, "everything is exactly as it should be." The venue wasn't a grand cathedral like my first planned wedding. Instead, we chose the botanical gardens where Marcus and I had spent countless hours discussing our curriculum between stolen kisses and shared dreams. As Marcus and I swayed to our first dance, he whispered, "Do you ever think about how different life would have been if you hadn't overheard Harrison that night?" I looked around the room at the family I'd found, the purpose I discovered, and the man who loved me not despite my past, but because of how it had shaped me. "That night didn't change my destiny," I replied. "It revealed it." 5 years after the fateful night that changed everything, I stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at Stanford Business School. The faces before me represented the next generation of business leaders, eager to learn from what had become known as the Montgomery case study. "Many of you know the headlines," I began, my voice carrying through the hushed space. "The jilted bride who exposed a corporate scandal. The woman who walked away from a Montgomery. But today I want to tell you about something more important than revenge or justice. I want to tell you about transformation." A student raised her hand. "Miss Chin, what made you finally decide to stop giving these lectures?" I smiled, resting my hand instinctively on my slightly rounded belly. Our first child, still our secret. Because some stories need to end so new ones can begin. The night before my wedding to Harrison had seemed like the end of my story. Instead, it had been the first line of a much better one, a story about choosing truth over comfort, growth over vengeance, and love that didn't need to be proven because it proved itself every day. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in the ending of one story, but in the beginning of a better one. Do you think you would have had the courage to walk away? To choose truth over the comfort of illusion? Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not the wedding that wasn't, but the life that became possible when I refused to marry a lie. 6 years after the fateful day that changed everything, I found myself standing in front of Montgomery Enterprises' former headquarters. The place where Harrison had once reigned supreme was now transformed into something entirely different, a symbol of corporate redemption led by the very women he'd underestimated. Diana had taken on a new role as the head of a corporate ethics foundation bearing the Montgomery name. The irony wasn't lost on any of us, using the family fortune to prevent the kind of corruption that had built it. But there was a poetry to it, a sense of justice that went beyond mere punishment. The latest initiative is fully funded, Diana said as we walked through the gleaming lobby. Her voice carried the subtle pride of someone who had faced devastation and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. We'll be implementing ethics training programs in 3 major universities by next fall. Claire met us on the executive floor, tablet in hand, confidence in her stride. The frightened, betrayed sister I'd comforted years ago had blossomed into a formidable businesswoman with a reputation for unflinching integrity. The quarterly report exceeded expectations, as she announced, leading us into what had once been Harrison's opulent office. Now it was an open workspace filled with light and transparency, glass walls instead of imposing mahogany doors. We've managed to rehire 80% of the workforce that was displaced by the scandal. I watched them with a pride that defied description. These women who had every reason to crumble under the weight of Harrison's betrayal had instead risen like phoenixes, transforming pain into purpose with a grace I still marveled at. None of this would have been possible without you, Diana said quietly as we stood looking out over the city skyline. You didn't just save yourself that day. You saved all of us. I thought about the cascade of events that have followed my decision at the altar, the trial, the media frenzy, the painful but necessary dismantling of the false legacy Harrison had built. The ripple effects had touched hundreds of lives, exposed connections to other corrupt enterprises, brought down power players who thought themselves untouchable. I was just the spark, I replied. You and Claire were the ones who truly rebuilt. My own consulting firm had expanded exponentially, with offices now in New York, London, and Singapore. Companies worldwide sought our expertise in fraud prevention and corporate transparency. Each new client brought stories of near misses and close calls, potential Harrison Montgomery's court before they could cause irreparable damage. That evening, as I prepared for a presentation at a corporate ethics summit, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see. Blake Thompson, Harrison's best friend and accomplice. Sophia, his voice sounded different, stripped of the arrogance I remembered, replaced with something that might have been humility. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Part of me wanted to decline, to keep that door firmly closed. But curiosity won out. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop far from the corporate world where we'd once moved in the same circles. Blake looked diminished somehow. The years hadn't been kind to him. His plea deal had kept him out of prison, but the stigma of his involvement had followed him relentlessly. I'm sorry, he said simply when we'd settled with our drinks. I've wanted to say that for years, but I didn't think you'd ever agree to see me. Why now? I asked, studying his face for any trace of the old manipulation. I heard about the ethics curriculum you've developed with Professor Chin. I've been teaching business courses at a community college in Montana. He gave a self-deprecating laugh. Quite a step down from where I thought I'd be, but it's honest work. I want to implement your program there. Show my students what happens when ambition eclipses ethics. I considered him for a long moment. Was this genuine redemption or another con? The old Sophia might have been too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Send me the details, I finally said. I'll have my team review the proposal. As we parted ways, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we'd all come from that fateful night. Harrison behind bars, Blake seeking redemption, Diana and Claire rebuilding the Montgomery legacy, and me. I had found a strength I never knew existed. Would you have been able to forgive the way I did? Not for the betrayer's sake, but for your own peace? 7 years after walking away from my wedding, life had settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. My corporate ethics work had expanded beyond prevention to rehabilitation, helping companies that had been caught in scandals rebuild with transparency and integrity. And then came the news I never expected. Harrison was up for early parole review. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, official-looking and heavy with implications. As a primary victim in the case, I had the right to speak at his hearing, to oppose or support his petition for early release. "You don't have to go," Marcus said as we discussed it over dinner in our Upper West Side apartment. His concern was etched in the gentle furrow of his brow. "No one would blame you for staying away." "I know," I replied, absently tracing the rim of my wine glass. "But somehow I feel like I need to see this through. Like the story isn't quite finished yet." Diana and Claire were divided on the matter. Claire had visited Harrison regularly over the years, witnessing his gradual transformation. Diana had been more selective with her time, protective of the healing she'd fought so hard to achieve. "He's different now," Claire insisted during our monthly dinner gathering. "The letters he writes, the programs he's started in prison, it's not an act." Diana reached for my hand across the table. "Whatever you decide, we're with you. But don't feel obligated to provide closure for him if it opens old wounds for you." The prison hearing room was clinically bright, devoid of warmth or comfort. I sat on a hard wooden bench, watching as Harrison was led in. 7 years had carved deep lines into his once smooth face. The designer suits had given way to prison-issued clothing, the confident stride replaced by a more measured pace. Our eyes met briefly as he took his seat. There was no smirk, no charm offensive, just a quiet acknowledgement, perhaps even a flash of shame before he looked away. The parole board reviewed his case methodically, his exemplary behavior, the counseling program he developed for white-collar offenders, letters of support from prison staff and even some of his former victims who'd found healing through his rehabilitation initiative. When it was my turn to speak, a hush fell over the room. Everyone expected the wounded ex-fiancé, the vengeful whistleblower. What they got was something else entirely. 7 years ago, Harrison Montgomery showed me who he truly was, I began, my voice steady in the silent room. Not on the night I overheard him with his friends, but through years of calculated deception. Through using those who loved him as stepping stones to power. I paused, feeling the weight of all eyes upon me. The man I was going to marry saw truth as an inconvenience, ethics as optional, and love as a transaction. But the man I've heard about through his sister's accounts, through the rehabilitation program reports, seems to understand something my former fiancé never did, that redemption begins with honesty. I turned slightly to look directly at Harrison. His eyes were fixed on the table before him. I don't oppose his petition for early parole. Not because I've forgotten what he did, but because I believe people can change when they're finally forced to face the truth about themselves. Harrison had that moment at the altar, and again in the courtroom. What he does with the understanding he's gained is up to him now. As I left the hearing room, I felt the final weight of the past lifting from my shoulders. Whatever the board decided, my part in this story was complete. Diana waited for me in the corridor, elegant as always in her understated way. "You surprise me still," she said softly as we walked toward the exit. "After everything, you found compassion." "Not compassion," I corrected her. "Understanding. We're all capable of terrible things when we lie to ourselves long enough. And we're all capable of growth when those lies are finally exposed." 2 weeks later, the notification arrived. Harrison's petition had been granted. He would be released in 30 days, subject to strict monitoring and continued participation in rehabilitation programs. Claire called immediately, her voice a mix of emotions. "He wants to meet with you. To apologize in person, properly." I hesitated, uncertain. Marcus took my hand. offering silent support for whatever I decided. Tell him I'll think about it, I finally said. Some conversations needed to happen face to face, however difficult they might be. The Foundation's annual gala coincided with Harrison's release date, a fact I tried not to see as symbolic but couldn't help noticing. As I stood addressing the crowd in the same grand hotel ballroom where I'd first overheard his true intentions, I felt the story coming full circle. 5 years ago, this foundation was born from betrayal, or I told the assembled donors and supporters. Today, it stands as proof that what matters isn't the harm that's done to us, but what we choose to build in its aftermath. Diana and Claire shared the stage with me, each of us representing a different aspect of resilience. Behind us, a screen displayed the Foundation's achievements, ethics programs implemented in over 50 universities, whistleblower protection initiatives, corporate transparency guidelines adopted by Fortune 500 companies. The Montgomery name once stood for power at any price, Claire said, her voice strong. Today, it stands for principle above profit, truth above convenience. As we mingled with guests afterward, Diana touched my arm gently. He's here, as she whispered. In the hotel lobby. He didn't want to intrude on the gala, but he hoped you might have a few minutes. My heart raced unexpectedly. After all this time, after everything that had happened, I hadn't expected to feel nervous. Marcus appeared at my side, sensing my tension. I can come with you, he offered. No, I decided. This is something I need to do alone. Harrison waited in a quiet corner of the lobby, dressed in a simple suit that bore no resemblance to the bespoke creations he'd once favored. He stood when he saw me approach, his movements careful, hesitant. Sophia, he said simply. Thank you for seeing me. We sat on opposite sides of a small table, 7 years of history hanging between us. You look well, he offered. I followed the Foundation's work. Your consulting firm. The ethics curriculum. It's remarkable. Why are you here, Harrison? I asked directly. We were long past small talk. He took a deep breath. I wanted to thank you. Not just for not opposing my parole, but for what you did that day at the altar. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. I know how that sounds, he continued. But it's true. If you had gone through with the wedding, if you hadn't exposed everything, I would never have changed. I would have kept taking, using, lying. You saved me from the person I was becoming. I didn't do it for you, I said quietly. I know. That's what makes it meaningful. He placed a small notebook on the table between us. I've kept this journal for the past 5 years. Part of my therapy was writing letters I never intended to send. To you, to my mother, to Claire, to everyone I hurt. I'd like you to have it. I made no move to take it. Why? Because I want you to know that your courage did more than bring me to justice. It forced me to face myself. To rebuild from the ground up. He pushed the notebook toward me. You don't have to read it now. Maybe never. But I needed you to have it. As I finally reached for the notebook, our fingers almost touched. I thought of the last time we'd been this close, at the altar, as I'd scattered the evidence of his crimes like confetti around us. I have one question, I said, tucking the notebook into my purse. That night, at your bachelor party, when you said I was just temporary, was any part of what we had real? Or was it all a calculation? Harrison's face registered genuine pain. That's the question that haunted me most in prison. The truth is, I did love you, as much as someone like me was capable of love then. But I loved success more. Power more. The game more. He looked down at his hands. I convinced myself that using people was just being strategic. That emotions were inefficient. I was so wrong. We sat in silence for a moment, the lobby's ambient noise creating a buffer around our private conversation. I don't expect forgiveness, he finally said. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. Not just for the people I hurt, but for me too. As I stood to leave, Harrison remained seated, making no move to follow or prolong the encounter. I wish you well, Harrison, I said, surprised to find I meant it. I hope you use your second chance wisely. I intend to, he replied. The rehabilitation program I started in prison, I've been offered funding to continue it on the outside. Working with white-collar offenders, helping them understand the real impact of their crimes. I nodded, thinking how strange life's parts could be. Goodbye, Harrison. Goodbye, Sophia. And thank you, for the truth. Walking back toward the gala, I felt an unexpected lightness. Not because Harrison had changed, or because his recognition of his faults had validated my actions. I felt lighter because I understood at last, my strength hadn't come from exposing his lies or walking away from our wedding. It had come from choosing truth over comfort, integrity over illusion, again and again, every day since. Marcus was waiting near the ballroom entrance, concern in his eyes. Everything okay? I smiled, reaching for his hand. Yes. Better than okay. I think that chapter is finally closed. Inside my purse, Harrison's notebook pressed against my side, a testament to a journey neither of us could have imagined on the eve of what should have been our wedding day. Perhaps I would read it someday. Perhaps not. What mattered was that I no longer needed his words or his remorse to complete my story. 8 years after that fateful night at the Grand Hotel, life had evolved in ways I could never have predicted. Marcus and I welcomed our second child, a daughter we named Truth, or Ruthie as she was affectionately known. Our son Thomas was already showing signs of his father's analytical mind and his mother's unflinching integrity. The Montgomery Ethics Foundation had become a global entity, with branches in 12 countries. Diana served as chairwoman emeritus, having passed the active leadership to Claire. My own consulting firm had merged with Marcus's university program, creating a comprehensive approach to business ethics that bridged academic theory and corporate practice. And Harrison? He had stayed true to his word, building a respected rehabilitation program for white-collar criminals. We crossed paths occasionally at industry events, exchanging polite nods but little more. Some bridges, once burned, could be acknowledged without needing to be rebuilt. On the 10th anniversary of what would have been my wedding day, I finally opened Harrison's journal. The pages were filled with raw honesty, painful self-awareness, and a gradual evolution from entitlement to responsibility. A final entry, dated shortly before his parole hearing, read simply, "The night before my wedding, I thought I was the one using Sophia. Now I understand. That night saved us both from a lifetime of lies. She chose truth, and eventually, so did I." I closed the journal and placed it on a shelf in my office alongside the case studies, reports, and publications that chronicled my professional journey. Another piece of evidence that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding the right partner, but about finding the strength to walk away from the wrong one. That evening, I stood in our garden watching Ruthie and Thomas chase fireflies in the summer twilight. Marcus joined me, his arm slipping naturally around my waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was just thinking about how different life might have been," I replied, leaning into his embrace. "If I hadn't forgotten those cufflinks, if I hadn't overheard Harrison that night." "Do you regret any of it?" His question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. I watched our children's laughter illuminate the gathering dusk and thought about the journey that had led me here, not to a fairy tale ending, but to something far more precious, a life built on truth, purpose, and authentic love. Not for a second, I answered honestly. That night didn't destroy my future. It revealed it. As the stars emerged overhead, I thought about all the women who might be standing at crossroads similar to mine, hearing truths they never asked for, facing choices between comfortable lies and difficult honesty. What would you do if you discovered the person you planned to marry saw you as nothing more than a stepping stone? Would you have the courage to walk away at the altar? To choose truth, no matter the cost? Because in the end, that's the real question this story asks. Not whether we can survive betrayal, of course we can. But whether we have the courage to act on uncomfortable truths when they're revealed to us. Whether we're brave enough to walk away from the futures we planned when we discover they're built on lies. The night before my wedding showed me who Harrison truly was. But more importantly, it showed me who I could become when I refused to look away from the truth, a woman strong enough to stand alone at the altar, rebuild from ashes, and eventually find a love that needed no deception because it was anchored in something real. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction at all. It's reconstruction. On your own terms. With your integrity intact. And with your eyes wide open to the truth.